You're listening to ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio. This episode is sponsored by Analogic. Analogic's a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 customer engagement solutions, as well as cost-effective and high-quality offshore Dynamics CRM programming services. Analogic's innovative solution portfolio includes Maplytics, a premier map visualization, routing, and geoanalytical app for Dynamics 365 customer engagement, Analink, that offers seamless integration between QuickBooks and Dynamics 365 customer engagement, and other productivity apps like User Adoption Monitor, Click to Clone, and Click to Export. We thank Analogic for sponsoring ProdCast.
Well, good. I've been working on some writing projects. How about you?
I've had a couple of, I always have a couple of writing projects in the fire. If it's not blog posts or writing a role-playing game campaign, I've also got a fun little back burner project that I'm working on with a couple of people around a book.
What kind of tools do you use when you write?
So I think, the first part of that is going to be that there's no single tool that I use for everything. I mean, when it comes to initial idea and note capture, I've talked a lot around, Evernote and OneNote and some of the different ways that I use those. And they're great for capturing ideas, kind of getting stuff down so I have a way to be able to search for it and sort for it later. But I suspect that, as you're asking this question, you're more on asking about how do I actually go about then compiling that more so than like sourcing ideas. Is that fair? Or?
Yeah, so we talked about your use of OneNote and Evernote and how you use those to kind of collect ideas. Mm-hmm. Once you got your ideas and start actually writing it, what tools do you use?
Yeah. So the most foundational thing that I use to be able to compile those ideas together is an application called Scrivener. Are you familiar with Scrivener?
I downloaded it on my iPad one day and never did anything with it.
Okay, well,
now I think of that. I think screenwriting. Is it like a screenwriting tool?
So it is a writer's tool, that's for sure. They have templates for screenwriting, for fiction writing, for nonfiction writing. But what's brilliant about Scrivener is it's actually a very robust database onto itself that allows you to capture a lot of additional information about the things, the ideas that you have, the structure of what you're actually writing out. And for someone like me, once I saw what was actually out there, all I could think to myself was, this is not just like a writer's, how do I even say this? It's not your liberal arts education writing tool that I would think of. It's almost like it was designed by, a true engineer in the way it structures this stuff, but it's approachable. It makes sense to someone without that type of a background.
Okay. And is this something you use on a PC or what?
Yeah. So they have apps for PC, Mac, iOS, and Android. I use it almost exclusively on my PC though.
Okay.
So the first thing I'll do is I'll say they do have a wonderful trial option. It's a 30-day trial, but it's a 30 non-consecutive day trial.
Oh,
so
cool.
if you're someone who wants to try it and then maybe forgets about it for a couple of months and wants to keep trying it, you still have 29 days left in order to work with it. So, if you hear anything like this, go to, I think it's literatureandlatte.com. We can put a note in the show notes and play with it. They have an interactive tutorial that you can use as well. But the basic structure of it is, so I'll load it up on my PC and I will have, think of it kind of like a workspace where you're going to collect all of this information and compile it into one place. There's kind of a folder tree type of structure that's configurable off to the left-hand side where you can find all of the, notes or sections or chapters, and I can get into that in a little bit here, but it's also a way to compile things like the ideas that you have, or if you have locations that you're talking about, or if you have characters that you want to be able to bring in. And then in the center of the page is the main workspace, and that's going to be a combination of different views that you can use. One of them is to have it be like a traditional looking word processor as far as, kind of formatting and just kind of what's laid out on the page. You can, do rich text editing with different fonts and sizes and that type of thing as you type it out. But there's also corkboard mode, where each of those different documents that you're working on has it looks like a little note card, like a 3.5 by 5-inch note card that has the main topic and then notes on it as well. And here's where some of the genius of Scrivener comes into play, is that every single note that you have that ends up in that binder, that collection of notes that you have on the left-hand side, it's a document unto itself that has a lot of different metadata around it. And this lets you do is you can do different types of tagging, like status tagging for each of those documents. You can also have multiple types of flags that you can set on it. So as an example, when you start creating, think of a book, you can set up the different chapters that you have. Each of those chapters are going to have different scenes in them. Each scene could be its own note card there. And you can have both the document itself, which is the actual written text of it, but then on the note card view, you can have your high level notes. So early on as you're planning, if there are key marks or points that you want to hit, you just scratch that down onto the note card, and you can find it in the context of that document or that scene whenever you're looking for it.
Okay, so how do you break that down? You and I are working on a joint writing project, which we haven't really announced yet, but it's going to have multiple chapters and each is going to deal with topics, but some of these topics overlap. So would you, if you say you're writing a chapter that had, say 4 different sections in that, would you do them all as one document and have your notes and ideas? I mean, are they tied to the document, or can you have these pegboard things go between different documents?
So you can have them go through different documents. And something I'd like to stress here is that you can have kind of an infinite amount of decomposition of these. So the way I structure this is I have like the overall book is kind of the root level folder. Then each chapter has its own folder there. Now those folders are actually documents at the same time. So you can have written overview information, introduction information, and so forth, but you also have that corkboard view. In there, I'll have a separate document for each one of the sections that are going to be inside of that chapter. And then inside each of those sections, I can optionally have call it subsections or, kind of that next level detail down. And I can keep going as deep as I need to. So for some chapters where they might be very lengthy, have lots of different topics, or be very deep into a specific topic, it allows me to, kind of post that information out there and get as granular as I need to, but I'm not stuck with having to get that granular for every different section of every different chapter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if you say use this on multiple devices, is it storing things locally, or can I put my Scrivener in my OneDrive or Dropbox and open it from another device?
Yep. So you can put it in your OneDrive or in your Dropbox. However, you do want to be careful on that, because if you have multiple people in trying to edit the same Scrivener binder at the same time, you can run into conflict issues. That collaboration side of it is not the it's not really the purpose for Scrivener of having multiple people editing at the same time. And that's true even like as a single person trying to edit from multiple devices at the same time.
Got it.
It will give you a warning about potential conflicts as you try to do that kind of thing. And there's a token as you have it open to try to guard against that type of thing.
So are you going to, if you say you're working on a document in Scrivener, are you going to then transfer that to Microsoft Word at some point if you need to deliver something in a Word format, or if you were to write it in Word, if you need to deliver a Word document, would you write that in Word?
So to answer your question there, what I would do is I would write the information in Scrivener. I would use all of my kind of formatting and do headings and main copy for each section inside of Scrivener. And there's an export capability of Scrivener that allows you to take that information from the kind of book that you've been building out, or from that structure that you've been building out, and you can export that into different file formats. So you can put it into a PDF or a text file or a document, like a Word document or HTML page. There are a bunch of different formats that can go into. Now, from there are still going to be some things like if that's that document that it's going to create will contain all of the information, but it won't necessarily be the prettiest formatting of it. So, I mean, you would still want to go through and do some of that final fit and finish type of formatting of the document before it would be posted somewhere or what have you.
Yeah, I've always found that third-party tools that can save in doc format, never get it quite right. So you always want to make sure you look at it actually in Word to make sure things are formatted correctly. Yeah. Headers are right, etc.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, I did find something in Word that maybe everybody knew this except me. I don't know. But when I realized this, it was a huge revelation. So I did a assessment document for a client, and it got up to 60-some pages. Okay. And it was huge, and it had a lot of different sections about different technical topics and best practices type stuff. And it just wasn't in optimal order when I got done with it, because it was kind of like I was going through things in the order we had discussed them, and then I thought, that really isn't the order that I would present it in, and thought, oh, great, now I got to reshuffle all this. But I found that, and again, you probably knew this, but on the navigation frame inside of Word, if you use the headers and build the navigation, you can actually drag and drop them and rearrange your document that way. It was a huge time saver.
It's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
It is.
But
apparently, I've been doing this all wrong for years.
Well, so you hit on an important point with that, though. If you're going to do that, is you have to use the actual like header formatting. So in that Word document, you can't just highlight and change the font size. You have to use the style that's been set up if you want to be able to use that. So
what about blogging? Does the Scrivener approach work for blogging?
So I use it. So I use Scrivener for a lot of things. When I take it out of the actual book writing concept, yes, I use it for blogging. Each post that I put together, I end up having as a chapter, and then I have as kind of the binder, like that biggest container is the name of whatever blog that is, because I have several blogs that I contribute to. I also use this. I do a lot of presentation building and then delivering of presentations. One that I just did for the user group summit that took place in October, I built out my entire structure of what I was going to cover in kind of each slide or each concept that I had became a folder, and then the slides or the screenshots or the demonstrations that I was going to do for each of those different items kind of went into that folder structure. So what I was able to do is I had the big picture idea, I had some of the main topics that I wanted to have, and then I had all of these little bits and pieces, the cool either tips and tricks or features or whatever that I wanted to include, I was able to create each of those as a different document and then kind of drag and drop that as a note card into the sections that made sense. So if I had one area where I needed a little more meat on the bone, I could bring in a couple of those tips to keep that section full. And it ends up being a good way to be able to work through that.
So you're using it as an outlining tool, basically.
Yeah, I use it as an outlining tool, and especially when I'm doing a presentation that includes a demonstration. One of the things that is kind of difficult to do sometimes is connect the dots between what is your click path going to be in the demonstration and what are you going to be saying and what are the key points that you're trying to drive home that's kind of the value behind whatever actions are being shown or features that are being shown. And what one of the things that you can do inside of Scrivener is you can create custom fields of this metadata that you want to capture about each of the individual documents that's in there. So I can have a field that's around the business value that's being supported by the feature that's being shown. And I can see that in the context of here's the exact words that I'm going to say that, when we did our review, somebody on the review team said, make sure you use these exact words. And we've got those in there. And I'm not having to manage kind of an unwieldy, Word document table format that shows, a click path and spoken language and maybe pictures and that kind of thing. It's a really slick way to be able to see all that information together in one place.
Right. Okay. So when you're writing, will you actually write your entire blog post in there and then transition it to WordPress or whatever? What do you use when you publish your blog post? Do you actually just write it through the WordPress interface?
Yeah. So I will write in another place. I used to do all my blog post writing in Evernote, actually. Once I discovered Scrivener, I started really focusing on doing my post writing there. And then I'll end up copying and pasting into a WordPress post. I've tried various kind of third-party tools, including the latest, open source version of LiveWriter to be able to post those, but maybe I just get too picky, but especially when it comes to things like having images and having them show up the right way with the right dimensions and that type of thing, I like doing that part of it physically in WordPress.
Yeah, the hard part about that, though, is the images is you can't just copy and paste it in. You have to upload the image, then insert it where you want it. It's okay if you have one or two images, but if you have 10, it gets difficult. The tools like Open LiveWriter make me a little bit nervous because I've accidentally published a post before I was ready to sometimes.
Yeah.
And I'm just nervous. I'm, at least with WordPress, I know if I save as draft or publish, it doesn't, I don't have that happen to me.
Yeah, and sometimes, to be entirely honest on this, sometimes I'll have, call it, 90% of a blog post ready to go. I'll end up getting it into WordPress as a draft, and I'll set the publish date out in the year 2100 just to make sure I don't accidentally publish before it's ready to go. But there's something about having that content almost ready to publish in WordPress that makes it feel like, oh, you know what? I can do this. I just have that last little finish line to be able to get across.
So when you actually write, do you start with the introduction or do you start with the body? Where do you start?
I start with an outline. I put together what are the things that I want to make sure that I convey. I build those into the outline. From there, I work my way back into a title that's going to appropriately convey what's going to be there. And, this is more on the blog post side. But I'll work that back into a title, and then I'll add in a bunch of the copy for each of those sections.
Okay.
Yeah. How about you?
I do outlining, more mental outlining. I mean, I'll have an idea of what I'm going to say and what the points I'm going to make. A lot of the blog posts I do are very straightforward format with 3 to 5 points, and then an introduction and a conclusion paragraph. A lot of the CRM tip of the days I do are shorter form, and so you've got maybe 1 or 2 main tips or recommendations, and then an introduction. So that follows a pretty standard format. But the longer form stuff I do, I will and I will write an outline if it's a lot of stuff, or at least the main sections. If it's a longer form article, and then fill that in. But then I'll usually start with the introduction, or sometimes I actually start with the conclusion. Because that kind of can help focus you for when we get to this point, here's what I want them to take away.
Yeah. So for me, if I don't outline it first and give myself kind of some edges around that playground that I'm gonna go play in, I find that I will try to cram too much stuff into a single post, or I'll get to that point of being almost overwhelmed with too many ideas. And I have to exactly. And
playground.
Gosh, that's where the older kids are. So I better let them do their thing.
And that's where I think people who don't write blog posts regularly, where they get hung up a lot, is they get going and get almost overwhelmed, either can't come up with an idea or get too much and it becomes too ambitious. So, I was just advising somebody in my team, take this idea and look at it from, 3 or 4 different angles. If we were dealing with technology, it's what's the technical side of it, then what's the user side of it, and then maybe what's the admin side of it. And that way you can break it up and narrow your focus down to, if I was that person. And the other thing I always ask myself is, who am I writing for here? Because it's very easy to mix your voices and be talking to 5 different types of people. And you want to make sure, I like to make sure that each of my posts speaks to, I have a pretty clear idea of who this is geared towards, because otherwise your message just gets so muddled.
Yep. Yep.
All right, well, I'm going to go do some writing. Thanks, Matthew. You inspired me.
This has been ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio with Matthew C. Anderson and Joel Lindstrom. You can follow Matthew at his blog, connectingthedata.com, or on Twitter at MC Anderson. You can follow Joel Lindstrom on Twitter at Joel Lindstrom. You can subscribe to the CRM Audio network of podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, or any place else that offers fine podcasts. This podcast is a production of Dynamic Podcasts, LLC.